إن القوات المسلحة تعيد وتكرر الدعوة لتلبية مطالب الشعب، وتمهل الجميع 48 ساعة كفرصة أخيرة لتحمل أعباء الظرف التاريخي الذي يمر به الوطن، الذي لن يتسامح أو يغفر لأي قوى تقصر في تحمل مسؤولياتها.
Year of Decay. On the 30th of June 2013, the Egyptians made a historical epic that is to be taught to the entire world, a lesson in the greatness and glory of all people. As usual, the Egyptians never break down against injustice and tyranny of a whole year under the reign of Dr. Mohammed Morsi. They rebelled against a system that abused religion and turned all of its opponents into non-believers, those who are ready to sacrifice their lives for the sake of Egypt. The armed forces responded to their appeal and sided with the majority of Egyptians, confirming to everyone that the Egyptian people is a red line that cannot be crossed. It was just a few months after Dr. Morsi assumed the post of president when it became crystal clear that the man scored world records in taking the wrong decisions and mismanaging the country. Day after day, he was falling into further traps. The people were not unfair to him. It was his sins and greed, as well as the greed of his group, that clashed with the consciousness, awareness, and acumen of the people, the invisible Egyptians. After the assumed power, it became clear that the way of thinking of the group has not changed over the past 85 years. They did not believe in democracy, which they pretended to fight for. Dr. Morsi could not be the president of all Egyptians. Instead, he became the representative of the Muslim Brotherhood in the presidency, because the totalitarian ideology of the Brotherhood does not believe in the individual who is there only to serve the interests of the group, in addition to their absolute faith in the sole ideology of the rule of the supreme leader. The fall of the Renaissance Project, the 5 promises made by the president during his election campaign, or for some citizens who do not belong to the Brotherhood group, the main reason why they elected Mohammed Morsi. At the beginning, the citizens saw this as enthusiasm, promising an optimistic path, but soon all the promises were never met, but were just a mirage. 5 crises that he pledged to eradicate in just 100 days. These are the waste problem, the fuel crisis, the security chaos, the traffic, and the loaf of bread. Only 10 out of his 64 promises were realized, and not over the first 100 days, but over an entire year since he assumed office. The rate of citizens' satisfaction for what he has achieved reached 39%. Fights in front of bakeries, successive excruciating crises of petrol and diesel, security chaos and the large number of thefts, the spread of garbage throughout the capital and all governorates, traffic jams and a high rate of road accidents.
وعود ال100 يوم دي ما يقولهاش غير عضو مجلس محلي.
The 100 days promises would only come from a member of a local council, a mayor, or maximum a governor, but not from the president of the republic. He failed us and was a liar. He couldn't achieve anything, let alone this Renaissance project, which had no clear vision or mission, beginning or end. But has he learned from his mistakes? All what he said were a bunch of lies, and the people realized that. It is a group of criminals who rules Egypt through fraud and lies. Even those elections, If they were fair on paper, they were indeed forged psychologically because they bought people's votes with promises of heaven instead of hell, in addition to the tea and oil used to abuse the poor.
المجرمون حكموا مصر عن طريق الغش والكذب والتدليس حتى هذه الانتخابات ولو كانت نزيهة من الناحية الورقية لكن هي فعلا مزورة تزويرا معنويا شديدا لأن هم اشتروا أصوات الناس واشتروا عقول الناس بوعودهم بالجنة والنار وبالشاي والزيت والسكر ويعني استغلوا الفقر والجهل في البلاد.
محمد مرسي كذب على الشعب المصري.
Mohamed Morsi lied to the Egyptian people when he said he will bring security and economic stability within 100 days. After a whole year under his rule, he didn't achieve any of his promises, so he was lying. He didn't achieve the desired economic growth, nor brought about security or social justice. We now realize that the 100 days was just a media show used for his election campaign to win the presidency.
عدالة اجتماعية حتى للمواطنين فإحنا كنا شايفين 100 يوم ده فقط مجرد الشو الإعلامي أو فقط لاستخدامه في البرنامج الانتخابي حتى يفوز بالرئاسة.
In addition to the Renaissance project, which did not even set foot on the ground, as if the deposed president and his group have made all false promises to the Egyptians, the year ended with zero achievement.
فهمنا بعد كده من خيرت الشاطر نعمل.
Later we understood from Khairat al-Shatir, the deputy of the Supreme Leader, that it was not a Renaissance project. In April, the former Supreme Leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mahdi Akif, told the Kuwaiti paper that this project would be realized after the Ikhwanization of the state.
يتحقق بعد أخوانة الدولة.
The polarization. The decisions of the Society of the Muslim Brotherhood has made in many instances a state of polarization in the national unity because they were only seeking private interests that did not include every and all Egyptians.
هذه القرارات بالطبع يعني أحدثت نوع من حالة من الانقسام.
These decisions, of course, caused a division within the political scene and also on the social level. For example, some of the most important decisions when Dr. Morsi came to power was the restoring of the parliament, which was disbanded by a constitutional court decision.
حينما جاء الدكتور مرسي إلى السلطة أصدر قراراً بعودة مجلس الشعب الذي سبق أن أصدرت المحكمة الدستورية قراراً بحله أو ببطلان الانتخابات التي أجريت بموجبها هذا المجلس. فطبعاً ده بالتالي أحدث حالة من
This led to a state of polarization and division between the political forces, widening the gap between the partners of the January Revolution.
شركاء ثورة 25 يناير.
And it did not stop at this level. The deposed president called for presidential conferences attended only by his supporters, and there was a call without any concern for the opposition. And his addresses over the past period was always directed to a particular part of the Egyptians, especially when he used to use the word of our constitution, our popularity, our dialogue. These sentences were enough to create a state of anger and discontent that we perceived in the Egyptian street. They amassed and warned, so they fell. Over the past year, Egypt witnessed successive crises, and the only solution came through the same way, amassing people.
الحشد لدى الإخوان.
Amassing people was one of the tools used by the Brotherhood to achieve their empowerment project.
وهو مشروع التمكين. يبقى الحشد مرتبط بنظرة الإخوان للحكم، الحكم الذي يعني أن الجماعة تحكم بغض النظر عن من يحكم.
For them, regardless who is assuming the post, they just should be part of the deal.
من أول أصغر أخ في أي شعبة مصرية وصولاً لمؤسسة الرئاسة نفسها.
And maybe the first of these crises was between the presidency and the Supreme Constitutional Court, so that the situation escalates more and more when the deposed president issued a decree making Councillor Abdelmajid Mahmoud, the Prosecutor General, out of his office, and this made all the judiciary perceive this as a huge interference in the legal processes, and this made him come back to his post. But then again, they appointed a new Prosecutor General. And the more important crisis came with the constitutional declaration, which again escalated the confrontation between the judiciary and the presidency once again.
الرئيس نفسه في الإعلان الدستوري الأول اللي أصدره لما عزل المشير.
The president himself in the first constitutional declaration, where he removed the field marshal and the Supreme Military Council from power, had no legitimate right to take this step, and I said so. He was elected under a constitutional declaration, enjoying specific rights, but he went beyond his legitimacy. When you resort to law, it gives an impartial and neutral opinion that has nothing to do with politics. He thought the judiciary was against him, but if there is a clash, it should have been with the Supreme Constitutional Court, which dissolved Parliament. Its last ruling also stated that the Shura Council and the committee tasked to write the Constitution were void. These are all legal matters, so he is the one who created the conflict.
تصور إن كل ده ضده، لا هذه أمور قانونية ونبهنا إليها قبل صدور هذه الأحكام. واخد بال حضرتك؟ فإذا الصراع هو الذي صنعه لنفسه.
And here, the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood Society began to amass the supporters of the president to protest in front of the Ittihadiyya Palace and in Al-Nahda Square in November of 2012. And then the deposed president went out addressing his people and his tribe in front of the Ittihadiyya Palace.
لابد وأن أضع نفسي في الطريق الواضح الذي يؤدي إلى تحقيق الهدف الواضح.
And when the number of opposition increased from the different revolutionary forces and the situation escalated day after day and a large number of victims fell, the deposed president announced the annulment of the constitutional declaration in December of 2012.
قرر السيد الرئيس المادة الأولى يلغى الإعلان الدستوري الصادر في 17 يونيو سنة 2012.
And the crises and the massing of people did not stop at this stage, but the media, just like the judiciary, also faced a lot of doubts and besieging. The supporters of the president actually besieged the media production city more than one time, stressing the decisions of the president in an attempt to impact and affect the performance of the satellite channels and to terrorize the media personnel and attack them. The Muslim Brotherhood continued on that path all the time. If anyone from the opposition and revolutionary forces declared their objection to the decision of the president, the Muslim Brotherhood supporters would arrive before the opposition with their masses and protests to support the president, just like what happened in front of the Ministry of Culture when the intellectuals and the artists announced their objection to the then Minister of Culture, Dr. Ala Abdel Aziz, and the refusal of the Ikhwanization of the ministry. The group gathered their supporters and attacked them.
Morsi always had the perception that the media did not highlight his achievements, as if the media made people believe that we had no electricity problem, nor diesel, fuel and gasoline crisis, despite the fact that these crises are lived by the citizen every day. In addition to the intellectuals who, by virtue of the nature of the Brotherhood, who tend to interpret matters differently, were put in a cultural clash with the other camp.
And this amassing for protests was not only in the squares, but after a group of youth organized the Tamarrud or rebellion campaign to pull the trust in the president. By the end of last April, there was an opposing movement as well from the Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters through the Tagarrud campaign, which again came as a form of impartiality. And when the revolutionary forces declared that they are going to go out on the June 30th, the opposition group also announced that they are going out on the streets on the same date on other squares, so that on June the 30th, it is a very important day in the history of Egypt. And it was indeed a sign of the fall of the weapon of amassment by the Muslim Brotherhood in front of the national revolutionaries who adore the land of Egypt, those who have gathered in all squares, reaching more than 41 million Egyptians. The Ikhwanization of the constitution. The Freedom and Justice Party under the reign of Morsi tried to exclude a lot of opposition groups from the constitution tasked with writing the Egyptian constitution, which was later ratified. This was clear in the various discussions and confrontations that were held at the level of experts in the constitution and the political forces when they announced that there would be a committee formed to write the constitution, going back to square one, that this committee did not represent all stratas of the Egyptian society. And the decree of the Supreme Constitutional Court was a clear.
الجماعة في حقيقة الأمر أرادت أن تصنع دستوراً.
The Brotherhood mainly aimed at creating a constitution that would serve their interests. They intervened in a blatant way, annoying all strata of the Egyptian society. It led to a constitution that, instead of separating powers, distributed the spoils of power among Brotherhood members and their supporters. It was indeed as if they were sharing the spoils among particular political factions, depriving the Egyptians from the right to a constitution.
ومن وقف بجوارها أو من يؤيدها فوزعوا، فكان الدستور توزيع مغانم بين فصائل سياسية معينة وحرمان فصائل سياسية أخرى وحرمان الشعب من حقه في الدستور.
The judiciary, throughout its first and last year in ruling Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood society lived in a constant confrontation with the judiciary, a conflict that was managed by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the most important reasons behind it was indeed the objection of a lot of Egyptians, those who went out on June the 30th to bring the fall of this regime. One of the most important competencies of the judiciary is its independence, but throughout the year of the Muslim Brotherhood rule, there were a lot of wars against this independence that almost handcuffed the independence of the judiciary.
Since he assumed office, he wanted to insult the judiciary with his decision to restore the parliament, which was dissolved by the Constitutional Court's ruling. Then he pushed for the formulation of a law on political isolation to prevent people like former candidate Ahmed Shafiq from contesting the elections, but there were legal bases for it all.
And in front of this befall of the crisis, the Muslim Brotherhood used power and force to actually terrorize the judges for the first time in its history, in a step of escalating the constitutional, legal and political stance that Egypt was going through. They sent their supporters to besiege the Supreme Constitutional Court on the 2nd of December 2012. And for the first time, the sessions and hearings of the court were closed and the judges were prevented from performing their job. In response, the judges of Egypt, in their meeting, stressed the refusal and objection to the decrees of the president. And the prosecutors also stood in objection to the general prosecutor, who was forced to resign. But the Supreme Council of Judges in May and June refused a law on the judiciary that they were trying to push from the presidency, despite the decrees that were not undertaken by the presidency. The attempts of the Muslim Brotherhood to control the judiciary did not end at this stage, for the Shura Council, which is totally controlled by a majority of the Muslim Brotherhood, tried also to abuse the judges by using another backdoor, providing draft laws to the Shura Council so that they can allow new graduates to be put as judges. Over the past 15 years, they were refused so. They tried to appoint 5,000 members in the different judicial committees and authorities in a step that attempted to have a full control over the legal system and to minimize the pension age of the judges so that they can get rid of the best judges in Egypt and open the door for the new ones from the Brotherhood. The year of decay, the freedom of information in Egypt. This was also set under the biggest question mark under the reign of Morsi. There were a lot of accusations to a number of journalists and an attempt at pursuing them legally, in addition to the seizure of a number of newspapers, in addition to cases raised against journalists because of their opinion, reaching almost 6,000 cases since his assuming post. It was not only for journalists per se, but the satellite channels were also closed down and shut down. 2 channels were closed, Al-Fara'in and the Dream networks.
فوجئنا بحالة من الضغط على الصحفيين.
We were shocked with a lot of pressure on journalists and a fierce campaign against the media since day one. There were statements by Supreme Leader Mohammed Badi' describing the journalists as Pharaoh's magicians. There were physical attacks on fellow journalists who were targeted, in addition to the martyrdom of our colleague Husseini Abu Dif, who was killed deliberately. We presented several reports to the public prosecution, but unfortunately, the private prosecutor, Talat Abdullah, refused to investigate the case.
وهذا أدى إلى استشهاد زميلنا الحسيني أبو ضيف الذي قتل عمدا مع سبق الإصرار والترصد. وتقدمنا بعدة بلاغات إلى النيابة العامة، ولكن للأسف الشديد النائب الخاص طلعت عبد الله رفض التحقيق في هذه القضية.
The journalist Al-Husseini Abu Dif was killed because of his work in journalism when he was trying to document the incidents of the armed groups belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood when they attacked the peaceful protesters during Al-Ittihadiyya demonstrations. Under his reign, the media production city was besieged by the supporters of Sheikh Hazem Salah Abu Ismail and threatening the workers there. The religious channels moved from a religious address to insulting politically, trying to get into the personality of people and insulting them. Those who worked there trespassed all religious and media ethics. And while this confrontation continued for the Ikhwanization, the former Information Minister Salah Abdel Maqsood said he was proud to belong to the Muslim Brotherhood Society. And this minister has also insulted one of the journalists with a wrong answer when she asked him about freedom. This has reached the level of using the Shura Council to turn all national newspapers into supporters of the Brotherhood by appointing the highest positions from the Brotherhood. This distrust with the Shura Council, the presidency, and the other workers came to the point of actually mentioning the names of the owners of television channels in the address before the last by the president. He said they were enemies, they incited people against him. And then the movement moved to the Ministry of Culture when intellects and artists went against him because that minister was not competent enough to be heading this culture. All artists and intellectuals went out in protest and they all held a sit-in inside the ministry that continued until June the 30th. National security. One of the most important files that cannot be touched upon easily when it comes to the reign of Mohammed Morsi. A lot of crises were faced under his reign, all threatening national security, especially Sinai and the Ethiopian Renaissance.
كان العام الأسوأ إن لما الجهاز الأمني الناس كلها بدأت تخبط فيه.
It was the worst year for the security apparatus. All the people started to understand and clash with it. Egypt has always been the destination of security and safety under the previous regimes. The Arab countries used to send us their sons here so we teach them how to bring safety and security to the homeland. When we used to recall elements from Scotland Yard to assist us in anti-theft strategies for cars, they would be amazed at their statistics and would say that we are one of the best police forces in the world.
يعني هل هذا حقيقي؟ نقول له يسألنا تاني الإحصائيات دي حقيقية؟ نقول وهو عارف إمكانياتنا. فيقول إذا كانت هذه الإحصائيات حقيقية لأنه مش مصدق إنها حقيقية يبقى أنتوا أعظم بوليس في العالم.
Sinai is considered in a state of full security since October war because when the new rule was closer to the Muslim Brotherhood and under the domestic internal affairs in Egypt, this necessitated a higher security level and more intensified presence in Sinai. According to experts and eyewitnesses, Sinai has become a very important and dangerous spot. The most important danger over the past period was not only on the international scale, but also attempts to give a wrong picture of the armed forces as if they were only preserving their force and power against the people. And this definitely was a threat to national security.
العمل على الأرض مثل اغتيال 16 جندي في رفح.
The work on the ground, like the assassination of 16 soldiers in Rafah, and the ones who were abducted in northern Sinai, in addition to the 4 police recruits who were taken and no one knew where they were. All these assaults against the security forces, and in particular the armed forces, aim at breaking the confidence in the armed forces to prove their failure.
كان هدفها زعزعة الثقة في القوات المسلحة وإثبات أنها قوات مسلحة فاشلة.
The Ikhwanization of the state. This terminology was not said per se, it was a real fact lived and felt by all Egyptians in the various sectors. Despite the fact that the deposed president Mohammed Morsi stressed more than once that he's preserving the national identity of Egypt in its multidisciplinary, but what really happened on the ground was exactly the opposite.
هي الإشكالية في الحقيقة والتناقض الكبير
The problem lies in the great contradictions we faced. We had a president who thought against all norms of state institutions, since he spent a large part of his life obeying the instructions of his superiors in the Muslim Brotherhood and could not distance himself from them.
ظل يعني جانب كبير جدا من عمره ينفذ رياضة السمع والطاعة حتى ألفها ولم يعد يستطيع الخروج عليه.
The Ikhwanization of the state featured in more than one incident. First, in the various judiciary crises, then the restructuring of the Ministry of Interior, and then the Ministry of Information. And finally, it reached the new constitution of the state through the committee that was tasked with writing the constitution. Most of them were from the Ikhwan or Brotherhood.
لا يوجد جمعية تأسيسية في العالم أثناء عملها ووضع دستور.
There is no committee tasked with writing the constitution in this world that tailor-makes it for the sake of one segment in the society. This is what happened, and the reward was ready with a lot of posts granted to their supporters, be it in the form of ministers, governors, or advisors to the president. 3/4 of the committee was holding executive or non-executive posts in the state. It was indeed a constitution fitting the president and the executive authority, which was the biggest constraints.
التنفيذية وغير التنفيذية للدولة، وبالتالي المكافآت كانت حاضرة، وبالتالي كان الدستور على مقاس الرئيس وعلى مقاس السلطة التنفيذية، وهذا من أكبر العيوب أن تجعل الجمعية تحت رحمة السلطة التنفيذية.
This terminology was clear through the governments of the Brotherhood, which were mainly made up of members from the Muslim Brotherhood. This led to the objection of many people. The government of Hisham Qandil was not multidisciplinary or representative of the national forces. Instead, most of the ministers were members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they themselves have appointed a large number of people who were also belonging to the Brotherhood. This proved to everyone that the Ikhwanization of the state is not only a terminology, but a clear trend followed by the Muslim Brotherhood to control the state.
مرحلة البناء كانت بالفعل تحتاج إلى نوع من
The construction phase needed some form of reconciliation and the distribution of responsibilities on the various political forces. Later, following the transitional period of 2, 3, or 4 years, the Brotherhood can come once again to power. It would have been wise on its part to make everyone carry the responsibility, but they were in a hurry to gain the fruits.
ثم بعد ذلك هي إذا ظهرت قوتها بعد ذلك تستأثر بالحكم، لكنها استعجلت قط هذه الثغرات.
The economy. The economic file is considered one of the most important files that can be based upon when we are evaluating the reign of Mohammed Morsi. There were a lot of oppositions between what has been announced by the presidency in terms of achievements on that level and what the Egyptians actually perceived on the ground.
فلما تكون حاسس بأزمة اقتصادية ولا تديرها بكفاءة.
When you realize there is an economic crisis but you don't run it properly, it is called failure, especially when it starts affecting all citizens. When you don't address the number one problem facing your rule, a problem touching people's lives, which is unemployment, it is a failure. As I always say, the idea of small and medium enterprises did not witness any real action to help the youth so they can start their own projects.
لمساعدة الشباب في انهم يعملوا مشروعات صغيره، فضلا عن ان احنا كلنا في كل وسائل الاعلام كنا اعضاء الحكومه وكل المجتمع مدرك تماما ان مش هيجي استثمارات خارجيه.
The economic crises, one after the other, raised the anger of the Egyptian street with the hike in prices in various foodstuff, followed by the energy crisis, which was a real heavy burden on the citizens, and ending up with the energy crisis with the petrol and diesel that were not found. And this also angered the Egyptians by the end of the rule of the Brotherhood. The economic situation was not inviting for further investment because of the instability on the political level, and the Brotherhood were not able to manage and stabilize the state, and this led to greater budget deficit of the state, which pushed the government to what they have refused before under the banner of the necessities would allow us to undertake what has once been refused. They addressed the International Monetary Fund for a loan.
الذي كانوا يرفضونه في السابق هو اللجوء إلى الاقتراض من الخارج.
Those who previously rejected borrowing from abroad and refused the loans for usury found no alternative but to market it as the best choice. They were eager for the IMF loan and thought it would be an achievement if the negotiations succeeded. This was contrary to all the beliefs and teachings of the Muslim Brotherhood, be it the explicit or the implicit ones.
كان يصور مجرد التصريح من مسؤول الصندوق بأنهم مضون أو أننا سنمنح القرض على أنه احتفاء يجب إنجاز يجب الاحتفاء به، وهذا بالفعل يعني كان شيء يعني يتناقض حتى مع فكر الجماعة سواء الفكر الذي كان معلن أو المبطن.
The economic situation continued in its deterioration for a long time. This definitely had its impact on the simple Egyptian citizen, and the suffering touched everything in his life. Under the reign of the deposed president, the poverty level increased to reach more than 25% of the people, in addition to an increase of the unemployed, the increase in the inflation rate, and the government failed in facing all those rates, the highest in the history of Egypt.
عجز الموازنة العامة تزايد في هذه السنة بشكل لم يكن له مثيل قبل ذلك.
The budget deficit increased this year more than ever before. At the beginning of Morsi's reign, the planned budget deficit stood at 150 billion pounds, but we were stunned after a year when he was deposed by the people that the budget deficit was above 200 billion pounds. When he assumed office, the foreign exchange reserves were enough for 3 months, but they deteriorated and he started heading abroad for help and assistance, which we received in the form of loan deposits, threatening Egypt at any time when those borrowers asked for the deposits.
ومصر صاحبة القيمة والقامة ويبدأ لفتح يده لكي يحصل على معونات ومساعدات تأتي إلينا في شكل ودائع تحت الطلب، أي أن مصر تكون مهددة بهذه الودائع وقتما تكون مطلوبة من أصحابها، ويقول أن الاحتياط النقدي قد تزايد.
The fall of the Egyptian diplomacy.
فقد حققنا خطوات متلاحقة وفعالة في مسيرة البناء والنهضة.
A year of clashes. This is the best way to describe Egypt's foreign relations under the reign of Mohammed Morsi. There were so many foreign trips, maybe just to fly away from the necessities domestically. When he tried to go against the Mubarak path, He chose the Shia folder. He wanted to have close relation with small countries like Qatar and threw away a strategic historical country like Saudi Arabia and most of the Gulf countries. And despite all of this, the Western framework was still with an American touch.
الدين والمذهب لعب دورا كبيرا جدا جدا في السياسة الخارجية المصرية.
Religion and sects played a very big role in Egypt's foreign policy. Egypt's influence in the world was minimized, and the best proof of it is that the religious element from the Muslim Brotherhood perspective overwhelmed the historical heritage. So when terrorist groups invaded northern Mali, the Egyptian government didn't even come out with a statement condemning this invasion.
بغزو شمال مالي لم يصدر عن الحكومة المصرية أي تصريح يندد بهذا الغزو.
The visits of Morsi abroad to China, Russia, Italy and Turkey were supposedly economic trips that would bring about fruitful cooperation and agreements that will have their impact internally and externally. However, they were all a failure. In addition, this diplomacy was at its worst stages when they were discussing the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which was discussed in a supposedly secretive and confidential meeting that was aired live and brought about a lot of jokes.
خليني أقول لحضرتك إن نقدر نسرب معلومات على سبيل المعلومات الاستخباراتية، إن مصر بتسعى لشراء نوع معين من الطيارات لتزويد الطيارات في الجو، إن مصر بتسعى إلى كذا. هذا الضغط حتى ولو لم يكن واقعي لكن هيوصل لنتيجة في المسار الدبلوماسي.
The year of decay. The decay of the image of the president, the leader. Since the dawn of history, the Egyptian state has never witnessed a president like the character of Mohamed Morsi. He was definitely a source of a joke for all citizens. They never left an occasion or an address that was not followed with a lot of jokes. And it was all based on the act and attitude of the president that is usually a source of respect, but he was very spontaneous in his attitude in all his addresses and public meetings, even when it came to foreign meetings, without any respect of the protocols. And he forgot that he was representing Egypt, one of the greatest countries in the world.
كانوا بينقلوا لنا رسالة أثناء ما احنا شغالين في حركة تمرد، الراجل ده خلانا مش عارفين نبص في عينين الأجانب.
They were sending a message. As we were preparing Tamarrud or rebellion campaign, we could not look foreigners in the eyes, whether in the Arab countries or elsewhere. How can Egypt's president be of such a modest level, looking at his watch while in an international press conference in a real embarrassing scene, especially for a head of state? He sometimes used expressions like oil and alcohol don't mix and the finger expressions or the monkey player. They are all not appropriate for a president. It is funny to the outside world, but for the Egyptians, it hurt them too to have this character as their president. A lot of our relatives abroad used to tell us that this man made us unable to raise our heads high in Europe and the States.
مضحك وهزلي، لكن المصريين على الرغم من هم كانوا بيضحكوا كانوا بيشعروا بالأسى، لأن مش معقولة تبقى دي صورة الرئيس اللي بيمثل مصر في المحافل الدولية. طبعا كانت هذه يعني كتير من أهلنا اللي في الخارج، المصريين اللي موجودين في الخارج، كانوا بينقلوا لنا رسالة أثناء ما احنا شغالين في حركة تمرد، الراجل ده خلانا مش عارفين نبص في عينين الأجانب سواء في الدول العربية، يعني في اللي موجودين في بلدان عربية أهالي البلد، أو الأجانب اللي موجودين في أوروبا وأمريكا، يعني مش عارفين نبص في عينيهم كيف يكون رئيس مصر بهذا المستوى المتواضع.
الدرانك يتمسك يروح السجن إذا كان درايفنج ولا إيه؟ يعني جاز أند الكحول دونت ميكس، مش ده قانون؟ لكن اللي هيحط صبعه داخل مصر هقطعه. إذا حد فكر يعمل كده هقطع الصباع ده. أنني إذا اضطررت سأفعل، وها أنا أفعل. مصر ما بنضغطش عليها، إحنا غير قابلين للانضغاط.
that despite the wordings and vocabulary that he used in most of his addresses, some addresses that were not even understood by the simple person or those eloquent persons, in addition to some terminologies that were quite weird, and still a lot of dictionaries failed to make us understand it.
وحتى الصحف الأمريكية
Even the foreign newspapers that lent him support were making fun of him, mocking his pure language, his incomprehensible statements. He once cited the Planet of the Apes movie in one of his interviews to the American press, and people were trying to find the link. The only part that fitted was in one scene when they cited one of the judges.
وجه الشبه اللي هو عايز يوصل له، يعني ايه ليه ضرب مثل بيه؟ ما لقوش غير ان هو في مشهد في الفيلم يعني في سخرية من أحد القضاة، فقالوا يبقى هو قصده كده.
During the time that his supporters considered him the grandson of Umar ibn al-Khattab and he's an affiliate of the prophets, Morsi was made fun of by all those who used the social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter. All his addresses and attitude and even the circumstances surrounding him were a source of a joke. When he got the honorary doctorate in philosophy from Pakistan, people wondered, that person who got an engineering doctorate questioned what did he do to reach such a doctorate degree and why from Pakistan. And why this costume? A lot of questions that were raised and full of jokes. It didn't stand at this point per se, but the credibility of the work of Morsi in NASA was also a source of doubt, as well as his curfew set in the Suez Canal cities that was responded by football games organized by the citizens and marches as if he never asked for a curfew.
هو يفتقد تماما للبروتوكول الدولي.
He lacks the basic rule of the protocol. A president should know how to stand, how to talk, how to eat and drink, or deal with the outside world. Even before his trips abroad, there should be someone arranging who would receive him. But we saw in Ethiopia the Minister of Education waiting for him, and in Qatar it was the Crown Prince. This man insulted the post of the president.
فشوفنا تستقبل وزارة التعليم في اثيوبيا، يستقبل ولي عهد مش عارف فين، حاجة يعني أهان منصب رئيس الجمهورية بصراحة يعني.
And following the greatest leader of the nation, Gamal Abdel Nasser, and the leader, Muhammad Anwar al-Sadat, with his eloquent addresses and the balanced personality that was known for former President Mohammed Hosni Mubarak, very well known for his attitude and addresses, Mohammed Morsi was a shock to the Egyptian people. The fall of victims under the reign of the deposed. Since he assumed office in June of 2012, there was not 1 month under his reign without a crisis. On the 5th of August, he faced an attack on our soldiers in Rafah. They were just breaking their fasting in Ramadan, but following the attack, 16 Egyptian soldiers were killed and 7 others were injured. And at the funeral, the president did not attend, in a scenery that brought a lot of discontent by the citizens. And up till today, the attackers and killers were not arrested. A few days later, thousands went on a demonstration around the vicinity of the American embassy following a documentary that was against Prophet Muhammad. And there were a lot of confrontations between them and the security forces, leading to the death of one of the protesters and the injury of more than 227 others. And on the 17th of November, Egyptians waked up to a very sad news, the clash of a train with a school bus in Asyut Governorate, an accident that led to the death of 50 children. 2 days later, the demonstrators on the 19th of November went out to commemorate the first anniversary of Mohammed Mahmoud incidents, and again clashes broke out between them and the Egyptian police, leading to the death of 2 people, including Gaber Jika, the member of the 6th of April movement, and the injury of 174 others. And for the first time in the Egyptian history, the death was observed in front of the gates of the Republican Palace, a catastrophic scene on the 4th of December. Confrontations broke out between the supporters and opposers of the president in front of the Ittihadiyya Palace, who were objecting to the constitutional declaration. This led to the 8 deaths, including the journalist Al-Husseini Abu Dif.
المصريين قتلوا بعض قدام قصر الاتحادية.
Egyptians killed each other in front of Ittihadiyya Palace in objection to the dictatorial constitutional declaration. He never preserved the sanctity of Egyptian blood. Under his rule, Muhammad al-Gindi, Jabir Jika, Muhammad Christie and Hussein Abu Dif all died. They were all my friends. I knew them well, and by the way, they elected him in the second round. But the one politically responsible for their death is Muhammad Morsi. Hussein Abu Dif was killed by Brotherhood members in front of Ittihadiyya Palace because he was against the constitutional declaration. The blood of Muhammad Gindi, Jika and Christie are all in Morsi's hands, since the president did not work for all the Egyptians. He was there for the Brotherhood, regardless of what the Egyptians wanted. He brought about the division of our society, leading to many deaths. May God Almighty bring justice as with the Egyptian people and the law.
سبب حالة من الاحتقان الشديدة في الشارع وحالة من الانقسام المجتمعي سقطت منها ضحايا بكل الأحوال سيحاسب عنها أمام ربنا سبحانه وتعالى وسيحاسبه الشعب المصري والقانون المصري أمام القضاء إن شاء الله.
The year 2012 ended, and at the beginning of the new year, a new crisis broke out with the killing of 19 recruits and the injury of 107 others in Al-Badrashin train accident in Giza Governorate on the 15th of January. This accident revealed a state of disorder and negligence when it comes to people's lives. On the 19th of April, a number of revolutionary forces moved in front of the legal authority in a day known as the pacification of the judiciary. The Black Bloc movement and Muslim Brotherhood youth moved around in confrontations, leading to many injuries in Cairo and Alexandria, but there were no deaths. And this moved to the religious conflict as well, because there was a conference to support Syria and a clear and open announcement of hatred to the Syrian people. Some extremists thought this was an allowance to kill, leading to a deadly and bloody case whereby 4 Shia members were killed in Giza and tortured. So again, the reign ended with blood as it began. Tamarrud and the fall of the regime. Again, inside the street that witnessed a lot of problems and decay, Tamarrud went out to try and rectify a lot of problems. This Tamarrud movement that attempted to tackle the mistakes. The idea came by 6 young Egyptians who thought it was important to bring in signatories from Egypt who would all agree on the need to end the rule of Muhammad Morsi. 100 Egyptian youth started off this movement both in the capital and the various governorates. The activity of Tamarrud started off on the 29th of April 2013. That was the foundation date of the campaign with the first statement. In May 2013, the Executive Office of the Popular Movement announced the official support of the campaign and announced that they will open up all their bureaus for its activity and encouraged its members to assist them.
من ذكاء حملة تمرد إن إحنا قلنا إن إحنا
The intelligence of Tamarrud campaign stems from the fact that we decided we are not going to hold a Million Man's March every Friday, but only one on June 30th. This was our objective and the focus of all Egyptians, June the 30th. Even those who never joined demonstrations went down that day.
هو اليوم ده اللي هتنزل فيه. الناس اللي قاعدة في بيوتها اللي ما نزلتش تنزل. إن شاء الله لو هتنزل تقف في الشارع قدام بيتك. ده اللي ركزت عليه حملة تمرد.
And Tamarrud movement has faced up a lot of objections from the Muslim Brotherhood. They have always wondered about its legalities, and the prosecution started off legal processes against them, saying that their activities does not represent a real crime according to the law.
أحد الأسباب الرئيسية اللي عجلت بنهاية نظام محمد مرسي
One of the main reasons behind the quick fall of the regime was relying on the people of confidence from the Brotherhood, regardless of their competencies. A simple question raised by many Egyptians: if Hisham Endil was not close to the Muslim Brotherhood guidance in implementing their orders, would he have remained in office with his modest and limited qualifications, which we all have seen?
قدراته المحدودة جدا اللي كان شايفينها المصريين إنها غير مؤهلة، هل كان يمكن إنه يكون رئيس وزراء مصر إلا لأنه قريب من مكتب الإرشاد؟
And then came the 29th of June when Tamarrud announced the number of statements that were signed for the rebellion movement. It reached 22 million signatories calling for the end of the rule of President Morsi. Millions and millions of Egyptians went out on the streets on the 30th of June. The Egyptians did not only sign on those sheets, but went out in person to bring the end of this regime. The military and saving the ship. The Muslim Brotherhood tried to infiltrate the terror spirit among the Egyptians, but they woke up to see one day finding only the debris of the Egyptian state. For one entire year, the Egyptians were suffering. A lot of people were awaiting to see who is going to save Egypt. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces were following up closely all those developments. Then they tried this smooth interference to bring about the dialogue between the presidency and the opposition. They tried to give a lot of chances within this framework, but it all failed. Then there were certain insults, hidden ones, to try and also bring about a rapprochement between the presidency and the opposition. But following al-Ittihadiyya, there was no way for talks.
اللي حصل من توجيه هذه الإجراءات أو المؤامرات
These procedures, conspiracies and insults addressed against the armed forces and its symbols was a tactic. The roles were distributed on the leaders of the extreme right, and I'm not going to call them the Islamists because this is an extreme right in Egypt. Roles were given to people like Abu Ismail, al-Biltagi, al-Aryan, and Mahdi Akif, their former leader, to direct insults against the armed forces.
زي أبو إسماعيل وزي البلتاجي وزي العريان وزي غيرهم وزي مهدي عاكف اللي هو المرشد السابق. كل دول كانت موزعة عليهم الأدوار لكي يوجهوا الإهانات.
This was not the first time that the armed forces attempted, under the leadership of General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, to bring about the Egyptians in unity. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has submitted a number of recommendations to President Morsi to save Egypt.
القوات المسلحة لن تسيس ولن تتحزن ومش هتتجر أبدا غير إنها تبقى مؤسسة وطنية مسؤولة عن مصر والشعب المصري كله. الأمر ده مش هيتغير أبدا. الأمر ده مش هيتغير أبدا.
General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was keen to send a lot of comforting messages to the Egyptian people that the armed forces will always be taking their side because they never and will never be in any agenda or plan.
تقلقوش أبدا على بلدكم مصر. وانا فرصه ان انا وانتم موجودين اقول لكم حاجه. المصريين لما ارادوا التغيير غيروا الدنيا كلها. ها؟ طبعا غيروا. نعم. عايز اقول لكم لما جيش مصر نزل حماكم وقعد 18 شهر ايده ما تمددش. خلي بالكم من الكلام ده كويس. انا بقول دي فرصه، انا الكلام ده بقوله لزمايلي الضباط اللي موجودين، لكن في فرصه ان انتم كلكم موجودين دلوقتي عشان تبقوا عارفين احنا ايدينا تتقطع قبل ما تتمسكوا. صحيح صحيح.
And the great day came on the 30th of June 2013, when all the Egyptians in millions massed on the streets in a moving scenery. But for the deposed president, all those millions of Egyptians did not make any change in the scenery. And that's when General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi came out with a statement giving all political forces a 48 hours deadline to carry the responsibility under the current historical circumstances. And it mentioned that if the will of the people was not responded to during this period of time, the military will announce a future roadmap and procedures that it will supervise. But Dr. Morsi gave a deaf eye to the statement and the people, and gave a last statement where he stressed and underlined his legitimacy more than one time.
التمسك بالشرعية هو طريقنا، وأن التمسك بالشرعية هو الذي سيقينا من أي فخ ومن أي منحدر ومن أي بداية لطريق في اتجاه غامض لا نعرف آفاقه ولا نعرف آخره، نفق ضيق نرجع له تاني نخش فيه، مش ممكن.
And after that address, his supporters made a sit-in in Rab'a al-Adawiyya and Al-Nahda Square, which witnessed a lot of violence leading to dozens of killed and many injuries, in addition to different confrontations in Muqattam, Manyal, Bulaq area and in various governorates. And with the conclusion of the deadline stated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and the spread of violence in the streets, the General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi came out with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad al-Tayyib, and His Excellency to address the Pope of Alexandria, as well as Dr. Muhammad al-Barad'i, in a scene that brought back the beautiful image of Egypt when they announced the end of the reign of Mohammed Morsi and the appointment of the head of the Supreme Constitutional Court as an interim president until the presidential elections are held to save the country. And the armed forces indeed kept their promise. As was always the case, they took the side of the people and saved the ship of the nation.
تسلم ايدينا يلي في حب مصر بتضحي بسنينا، يلي انت وفيت وعد كان بينها وبينك، يلي انت كنت شايلها دايما جوا عينك. تسلم ايدينا يلي انت شايل هم بلدك فوق كتافك، كل اللي عرفك واللي قبلك واللي شافك بيدعي باسم مصر ليك الله يعينك.